Hi, this video is designed to help you understand the differences between quotations, paraphrases, and summaries just a little bit better. Most of my students in the past have been pretty good at quotations. Once they learn the idea of having a signal phrase and how to include the in-text citation, things are pretty straightforward from there. People have a little bit more trouble with paraphrase and summary. So hopefully when you read Chapter 9, you're going to get a lot of good examples for this, but I wanted to go over it in a little bit more detail as well. So a quotation is when you take the exact words of your author, right, and you put them directly into your paper. A paraphrase is when you read something and you think that the idea is really valid and useful and you want to put it into your paper, but you don't want to overuse quotations, and so you want to put it into your own words. When that happens, it's important to put it all in your own words, not to use any of their original language, with a few common words being the difference, and also to have a signal phrase and a citation. A summary is when you see an idea that you think is really good and you want to include it, but you don't want to include all the detail, and so you shrink it down and it's shorter. Okay, so I want to use this example, this original source example. If you need to, pause the video and read through the example on your own. Okay, so again, this is something that you might come across in one of your articles, whether it's a website or an academic article, and now you want to put it into your paper. Let's start with the idea of summary. Right? So if you had this 3-sentence thing and you wanted to write it as 1 sentence, think about how you might restate this in order to put it into your paper. Okay, so here's an example. The top part is the quote that you've read. So we have a quote at the top, and you want to summarize it. You want to shrink it down and make it shorter, but still get the main ideas across. So let's look at this example. When people have an impending decision, they have to make a choice. People faced with a lot of choices might not even make a decision. Well, at first glance, it seems pretty good. It restates the basic information from the original, and it does so in a shorter way. But now look back at it, and I want you to look and see if there are words in in that longer section that were reused in the summary that I wrote, that bottom one. Can you see maybe any words that are the same? All right. So here's an example. Again, that top is the same 2 quotes we were just looking at, and that phrase, an impending decision, is in the first, that's the author's original language, and it's also in the summary that the student wrote on the bottom. Okay, let's take another look. People faced with a plethora of choices. Well, the writer on the bottom has changed that to people faced with a lot of choices. But people faced and of choices are still exactly the same. So we've basically copied the sentence structure of the original, and we've copied the language of the original. So that's not going to work as a summary. Also notice that there's no in-text citation for this summary. So all of these things would make this what's called plagiarized, which means that you've made some kind of mistake along the way trying to use evidence in your paper, and you used the original language of the source, or you used the original phrasing of the source, or it's your own words but you didn't include a citation. All right, so these are things that you want to look out for as you're reading through your information and your research, and you're thinking about how to incorporate it into a paper. All right, so let's look at one that would work. Okay, so more options make it harder for people to make a decision, Bagley argues. In this case, it's much shorter. I don't have any of the original words in my idea except for people and decision. Those are fairly innocuous words. That is, everybody, I've used the word people, I've used the word decision. I don't use it in the same way that they use it. I don't use it in the exact same place in my sentence, and that's part of the things that make it a little bit safer for you. And on your first couple of papers, I'll point out and show you where you might have made mistakes along the way of trying to do this. So all your words, and notice that I have the author's name and a page number, so I have that citation and I'm safe there. Okay, so again, that's an example of a summary. Taking a longer piece, shrinking it down to get the main ideas, but using my language, my sentence structure, and an in-text citation. Okay, in a summary, we shrink it. In a paraphrase, it's about the same length, but again, an important idea. So let's look at the example. So take a minute to read the bottom, and that's an example paraphrase. Again, hopefully you can see that it basically states the same thing as the original, so we're on the right track for that. We haven't changed what it said. That's something you want to watch out for. But again, start to look for language that was in the original that's also in this writer's sample. Do you see any? There's some. So I see 6 or 7 words that were in the original and are also in the new one. And so that's a little bit of a problem. It's something that people have often do when they're looking at it. Also notice that it's kind of in the same place as the original. That's a problem too. So I could have maybe used the word choice, but it depends on where I put it and how it comes across. Here, it's almost in the exact same spot as it was in the original. Okay. The next thing is, if you look at the information that I've underlined, the writer on the bottom has changed the words, but they haven't changed the sentence structure. But decision science has shown, however it turns out, when people are faced with a plethora of choices, it turns out when we have too many choices, are apt to make no decision at all. We don't make a decision. It's the same sentence structure. This happens a lot if you are looking at the original too closely while you're writing your sentence. Your brain gets stuck on that sentence structure and it likes it. It's probably well written if it's in your source. So what I do in this case to avoid this kind of problem is I'll read the section that I want to paraphrase. I'll think about it. I'll spin it in my head and try to think of an example, make sure I really understand it, and then without looking at it, I'm going to write out my paraphrase. And then I go back and double check that I've used my own sentence structure and my own language. Also notice the second example here, the writer on the bottom has not included a signal phrase or an in-text citation. Without that information, it would be plagiarized even if I had used all my words and all my sentence structure. Without that citation, it's still plagiarized. I haven't told my readers, hey, this isn't my idea. I didn't come up with this. I don't study decision science. This was somebody else's idea. All right. Let's look at an example of a correct one. Take a second to read it. All right. So what makes this one a correct paraphrase is that I haven't used, again, much of the language of the original of any. I used the word decision. Is probably the only one that is in both places. The sentence structure is different. I've used an in-text citation in both places. Notice I used the author's name the first time, and I didn't use the author's name the second time because they're real close together, and it's obvious I'm using the same source. When I did need to use a phrase that the other authors had, decision science, I put that part in quotation marks. So that's something you are allowed to do. Even though a paraphrase is all your words, if there's a particular phrase that you think is really important, you can put that part in quotation marks, and then you're on board. Some of this can be tricky. Some of it's a little bit of a gray area, and that's one of the things that we're going to be working on throughout the semester. Now, as I said before, when we quote, it feels like it might be easier. We're taking the exact words from our source and we're picking them up and putting them exactly in our own paper. There are a few things to consider though when you're quoting. One is that the quote cannot stand on its own. It has to be integrated into your ideas, your thinking, your paragraph. And so if you look at my example on the bottom, there's a sentence that relates to the idea, and a paragraph maybe has one clear idea, and so there's a sentence that relates to what I want to say, and then I have, however Bagley writes. This really clarifies what I'm trying to say about decisions. I've said many people think this, but Bagley says something else. Therefore, my readers know there's some reason that I'm about to read this quote. If quotes are just popped in there, readers skip over them. They're not helping you make your case in any way because readers have low patience for that. However Bagley writes, I have my quote, and then I have in parentheses the page number. So I have my signal phrase, I have my quote with quotation marks, I have my page number in parentheses, and a period at the end. Remember we said to pay attention to that punctuation. And then I have what's called a follow-up sentence. This one's really important. Our own ideas about information and choice then are not based on science, and our culture may need to rethink how instant information influences our lives. That's me. That's my idea. That's my sort of restatement of the quote, and it's my connection, my understanding of it. This is really important. The quotes don't speak for themselves. Again, here you're going to see in blue is my information, in yellow is citing the source, and the rest is the quote. Really important to make sure that you do that every single time you quote. All right. So as a review, a summary is all of your words, a paraphrase is all of your words, and a quote is all of their words. A summary is all your phrasing too. That's your sentence structure. The same goes for a paraphrase. And in the quote, it can be their phrasing or you can incorporate it into theirs. A lot of times the most effective quotes are just a few words long. And you just incorporate that into your own phrasing. A summary is shorter and a paraphrase is about similar. If you need to shorten a quote, you use an ellipsis. That is dot, space, dot, space, dot, space. For all three, you need a signal phrase and a citation. That's really important, and it's one of the things that trips up new researchers at the beginning. That every single time I include information that I didn't invent out of my own brain, I have to cite it. So hopefully these are some things that are going to help you remember as you're working on your papers how to incorporate that evidence into your own ideas. And that's what's going to make you a solid researcher and writer.